welcome to another episode of Latitude. Balochistan has once again been in the news, most recently because Pakistan continues to claim that they have caught a former Indian naval officer who they allege was involved in a spying racket and encouraging the secessionists and the insurgents who operate against the state of Pakistan. But Balochistan has been a problem for Pakistan for several decades now, most importantly because it is the most resource-rich region of Pakistan, but continues to be the poorest region when you look at the Human Development Index.
With Pakistan claiming that it finally had irrefutable proof of an Indian hand in Balochistan in the form of a doctored video of former Indian Naval Commander Kulbhushan Yadav, they believe they could rest easy by putting all the blame at India's doorstep. In reality, though, Pakistan has had to contend with Baloch uprisings ever since its creation, with a major standoff between the Pakistan Army and the Baloch tribesmen back in the 1970s, which left thousands dead. The current insurgency is over a decade old, having spun out of control in 2005 after General Musharraf used excessive military muscle to subjugate the people, leading to widespread human rights violations, unexplained abductions by Pakistan's intelligence agencies, and widespread custodial deaths. Balochistan is one of the 4 provinces of Pakistan located in its southwestern region, with its largest city, Quetta, also its provincial capital. It borders Afghanistan, Iran, and the Arabian Sea, where the Gwadar port will play a significant role in the China-Pakistan economic corridor and consequently in the economic development of Pakistan. But the Chinese have already begun to express concern about the safety of their workers on this economic corridor, as Baloch nationalists have attacked Chinese oil tankers in the recent past. And though the Pakistan Army is determined not to let anything stall the Chinese CPEC initiative, there are reports that an alternate route to Gwadar is being planned. Despite Balochistan's extremely inhospitable conditions, it has considerable gas and mineral reserves. Balochistan constitutes 44% of Pakistan's land mass but has a population that is only about 5% of Pakistan's population. And while Balochistan contributes about $1.4 billion per year in gas revenues, it only receives about 8% in royalties. Now, with global conglomerates vying for Balochistan's riches like gold and copper, Pakistan's army has become the biggest land grabber in the region. The question now for India is whether it wishes to silently witness the mass murders of the Baloch people, even as Pakistan loses no opportunity to raise its voice over Kashmir, or to adopt a proactive policy to get justice for the Baloch people and put Pakistan in the dock.
And to look at in some detail in the crisis in Balochistan and what are India's options, we have 2 well-experienced commentators on Pakistan and Balochistan. We have Mr. Alok Bansal with us, a former captain of the Indian Navy and now director of the India Foundation, and also author of a book on Balochistan, and a well-known commentator on Pakistan and issues related with our neighbor, Mr. Sushant Sareen, a senior fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation. Captain Bansal Saab, I want to ask you, what is really the problem in Islamabad's relationship with Balochistan? Because every time you get Pakistanis on any international forum or on television, they turn around and say that we've done so much for them, but the statistics say something else. Balochistan is a resource-rich province, but it gets a pittance out of what its resources are. Gas is a case in point. Balochistan has been at the receiving end of virtually all the Human Development Index related negative aspects from Pakistan, and human rights abuses are galore. So what's your take?
See, right from 48, when Balochistan was forced to accede, in fact, the state of Kalat, Baloch have been seeking a separation. In fact, in 48, we had the first insurgency, 58, 63 to 69, and 73 to 79. The sense of alienation has actually aggravated because there are no Baloch in the higher echelons of army. Except for one lieutenant general, the Baloch regiment has no Baloch troops. The exploitation is enormous. You have already talked. They have bulk of the economic resources. In fact, if we go back in 48, when Gosbaks Bejenjo had said that we cannot survive without Pakistan, he said, we had the minerals, we have the coast, can Pakistan survive without us? That actually in turn sums up the status of Balochistan. The next problem is that Pakistan wants to build mega projects in Balochistan like Gwadar, Mirani, Sandak. Now, they say that we want to build Gwadar like another Karachi. They realize if Gwadar's population is even half of Karachi, the Baloch would become a permanent minority in their own province. As it is, the influx of Pakhtuns has actually reduced their population. Now, all these things that they are going to be marginalized in their own territory, and we must understand, Balochistan is 43% of Pakistan's landmass, inhabited by less than 5% of its population. So, it's a sparsely populated area, and that has its own. So, the feeling that they would be marginalized, their language, their culture will be wiped off, has actually aggravated the sense of alienation.
In fact, Mr. Sareen, I mean, many US commentators and international observers have often said that, I mean, there is very little that holds Pakistan together, except, as Hans Morgenthau said in 1950s, that they have no interest in common except one, and that is the fear of Hindu domination from India. But I want to also link the Baloch issue with it. One is the Pakistan Army's role there, which is extremely high-handed. Many people have commented about it, including Ahmed Rashid, who has said not hundreds but thousands have been killed. Human Rights Watch, South Asia Human Rights Watch, European Union Human Rights Watch, and many other international agencies, including the Guardian newspaper, carried out a study about human rights abuses. Musharraf even condoned rapes by army officers in Balochistan, saying that the onus of proving what was wrong lay with the women and not so much as his military officers. So with that kind of a relationship, is there any possibility of Balochistan turning the corner vis-a-vis Pakistan and the Islamabad elite and Rawalpindi elite, or are we looking at another Bangladesh happening?
I don't think we are looking at another Bangladesh just yet, because the objective conditions and what happened in Bangladesh and what is happening in Balochistan are very different. Although even in Bangladesh, I don't think the international community ever bothered about the genocide which was being carried out there until the Indians stepped in and then tried to shake the conscience of the world. And even then, the more cynical calculations of the superpowers actually weighed much more heavily than the considerations of human rights. But other than that, I think while it might be true what Hans Morgenthau said about Pakistan and India, it might be true about some of the other parts of Pakistan. In the case of Balochistan, despite being a very conservative society, it's a very secular society. And that is another thing which does not fit very well with the Pakistani narrative. You do not see the kind of pogroms against Hindus in Balochistan. In fact, one of the primary things which the Pakistanis held against Nawab Akbar Bukti was that he had a very strong or a very large Hindu population which used to stay in his area, and he used to protect them. And it was after the Pakistan army bombed one of the refugee camps of the Hindus who had taken refuge with him in his fort and killed about 60 odd people. That is when he took to the hills. So the Baloch have that tradition of not being they've not been part of the Taliban network, they've not been part of the sectarian networks, although what has now started happening is that the Pakistani army is deliberately pushing in the Taliban and organizations like the Lashkar-e-Taiba to start making inroads in Balochistan to turn the population around, make them good Muslims and good Pakistanis. And that is what the fear is, that if the Baloch are not given the attention they deserve, the Pakistanis might actually create a situation whereby the Baloch aspirations will be murdered, and there will be some kind of a demographic transition, and maybe even, and more dangerously, a sort of a mental transition from a secular liberal kind of a framework to the kind of fanatical framework which suits the Pakistani narrative.
Mr. Bansal, Pakistan, it's clearly established that Pakistan's done a number of wrong things as compared to the right things in Balochistan, but they have always wanted to pass the blame on to India, and they've been looking at straws in the wind. Earlier, there was this one remark by the eminent Christine Fair in Foreign Affairs Journal, which said that Indian consulates on the Pak border with Afghanistan and Iran are certainly not just doing diplomatic work but other things, and implied thereby that they would be supporting some kind of Baluchi uprising through that, and that Pakistan made it an article of faith. But as I remember in the same article, I think she had also said that Pakistanis lie so much that it's hard to believe them when they tell you the truth. But that's one aspect. Now you have the saga of the naval officer, ex-naval officer who's in Pakistani custody, and Pakistan is doing everything to doctor the evidence. So quite clearly, Pakistan's obsessed with the Indian hand there. Now, to what extent can they continue to deny their own shortcomings and pass the blame all off to India?
See, let me tell you, in 2007, in one of the Track 2 dialogues, General Moinuddin Haider, who was the former Interior Minister of Pakistan, had said so that there are 60 camps being run by RAW in Afghanistan. And I asked him one question, that in that day's Afghanistan, that is 2007, to move from point A to B, you either needed Taliban support or American support. And I asked him, who do you think is supporting us to run those 60 camps? And he had no answer. Now, as far as Commander Jadav's case is concerned, I presume he has been kidnapped from inside Iran's territory, and in the past Pakistanis have been doing it. There was a time when Iranian border guards were kidnapped and taken inside Pakistani territory, and Iran had to resort to violent means. So this has been done. Pakistan has been trying to cover up its own shortcomings by doing this. An example was their textbooks, where it says that the Baloch are uncouth, uncultured, and all those things have been written. If you go back into the history, in 1958, Nawabzada Nauroz Khan, who was a 90-year-old man fighting, they swore on Holy Quran that you come down and we'll negotiate. When he came down, he was arrested, his sons were hanged, he died. So the whole Baloch saga is actually a saga of treachery by the Pakistanis. Here, one thing is very important, that in the world, you would not find any other ethnic movement like Baloch movement, because Baloch don't speak a single language. Baloch, the people who call themselves Baloch, actually speak two different strands of Balochi and Brahvi. And Balochi and Brahvi are as different as chalk from cheese. Brahvi is a Dravidian language and Balochi is an Iranian language. But despite huge difference in language, they call themselves Baloch. Their whole narrative is driven by a sense of persecution by the Pakistani state. This persecution has actually unified them.
Very interesting. In fact, I mean, if you look back into the whole Baloch saga, it's also again and again shows up that at least in 2000, 2005 and thereafter, it was Musharraf who really upset the entire apple cart. First by condoning all sorts of acts by the army, then by killing Nawab Akhtar Bugti, who's a legend in Balochistan, and then finally announcing that he had sorted the Baloch problem 500%. But we'll be back after a break to look at what are India's options in Balochistan. Welcome back. We continue to look at the issue of Balochistan, how Pakistan has continued to mishandle that whole relationship, and we have our two experts with us. Mr. Sareen, you've recently come out with a monograph on the China-Pakistan economic corridor, and quite clearly Pakistan has been making all sorts of promises to the Chinese that they will make sure that the entire China-Pakistan economic corridor will run uninterrupted through Balochistan, though I have heard reports that the Chinese are suggesting another route for Pakistan to reach Gwadar outside of Balochistan. So, A, the Chinese element there, to what extent that's involved. And there is another factor, that while Pakistan blames India for inciting the Baloch and supporting the insurgency, I'm told there is also an element of American and British intelligence agencies which also have had their eye on Balochistan and want to carve out a role for themselves there. Now, is there some truth to all this?
I wish there was, because frankly speaking, if you look at the map, if Pakistan has a strategic location, it has only if Balochistan is part of Pakistan, not otherwise. Otherwise, it's just another place. So I hope somebody else is meddling out there, but I have certain doubts on that. On the Chinese investments, while the Chinese are making these investments, they also made investments in the mid-90s, even in the earlier part of the 2000s, and yet Gwadar never really took off. This time, this is the third time round that Chinese investments are being made, albeit in a slightly bigger manner. How effective they will be and how much it will actually become a game changer, I think is a matter of speculation. I have my doubts, which is what my monograph is all about. But let me just come back to this whole business of Balochistan, and I think to some extent, Maroof, we have done grave injustice to the Baloch cause, uh, especially Indian media and the Indian public discourse, where we keep talking about Balochistan without doing a damn thing for the Baloch. And that is the shocking part, because what we do is, every time we mention the word Balochistan, the fact that we have not done a damn thing for them, and yet the Pakistanis get this handle that, oh, the Baloch are getting Indian support. And this is the big problem, that we haven't been able to understand that, look, either we support the Baloch or we talk about the Baloch cause because we want to sock it to the Pakistanis. We want to poke them in the eye, or we want to do it because it's the right thing to do, or finally because it's the strategic thing to do. I think there is a reason to do all three reasons stand. But we must make up our mind whether we want to do it or we want to dabble with it as a kind of a negotiating stance and then leave the Baloch, as we have done in many other cases, and throw them to the wolves. I don't think that is the path we should take. So ideally, there is a very strong case which the Baloch have for their independence, and if we are serious, then we should back them to the hilt.
Those are very interesting points about how much and what India should do. Mr. Bansal, would you like also to throw some light on that, in the light of, as I understand, since last year, this government has initiated a set of steps which shows very clearly that India now wants to play the tit-for-tat game with Pakistan vis-a-vis Balochistan, vis-a-vis Kashmir, and also taking up the issue of those others on the other side of the LOC in POK and Gilgit-Baltistan, as a whole lot of other people who don't seem to get the light of the day with the Punjabi-dominated elite in Rawalpindi and Islamabad. Your view?
I think Balochistan is the only province of Pakistan with which we don't have a common border. We must also understand that Baloch do not have the critical mass to break away. They are less than 5% of the population. So this Baloch nationalists also realize, and as a result, late Nawab Akbar Khan Bukhti had tried to create a Baloch Sindhi Mahaz. In fact, when that Dr. Shazia was raped, he made a very instigating statement. He says, more than the Baloch, the Sindhis should have raised, because she was a Sindhi lady. But I don't appeal to dead people. That was to instigate Sindhis to write. And Sindhu Desh Liberation Army, which has actually now been erupting on and off, is actually functioning under the tutelage of Baloch Liberation Army. Incidentally, the Baloch nationalist movement as of now is not unified. So that has its own dimensions. But definitely, as compared to Balochistan, our support for Gilgit-Baltistan is far more important, because constitutionally Gilgit-Baltistan is part of that, and with their citizens getting affected, India has a constitutional right to protect them and defend them. And I think we have a valid stake there.
Mr. Sareen, last question, but I go back to an article written by Hamid Mir in one of Pakistan's publications after the Sharm el-Sheikh disaster, in which he said that he was there at Sharm el-Sheikh. Apparently, as per him, then Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Jilani, raised the issue of Balochistan with Dr. Manmohan Singh. But as claimed by Pakistani officials, Hamid Mir has said no dossier was handed over to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. Likewise, no dossier of any relevance was handed over to the United Nations last year, when the Pakistanis again said, we are going with all the evidence there. And then again, Hamid Mir further goes on to make the point that, repeatedly the insurgency has been inflamed at the time when there were high-handed military dictators. It first started with Ayub Khan, then there was Zulfikar Bhutto in the 70s, then Ziaul Haq also did a bit of meddling around, and Musharraf, of course, completely spoiled the game for Rawalpindi. But he says that India and Balochistan and Pakistan can really work out a solution, because a pipeline or more of gas could pass through from there, so therefore stability there is also in India's interest. Do you buy that?
Number one, it's not for us to decide whether the Baloch are going to be satisfied or should be satisfied in Pakistan or not. That's for them to decide. I don't think if there is any pipeline which comes through Pakistani soil, an unreconstructed Pakistan as it is right now, I don't think it makes any sense for us to mortgage our energy security and our national security to the Pakistanis on something like a pipeline. So I wouldn't buy that argument. The second thing is that if, when I talk about the strategic location of Balochistan, it has a strategic location not when it is within Pakistan, but only when it is without Pakistan. And I think to that extent, it should become an exciting prospect for many of the countries of the world. And what Alok right now said, that it sits astride the Persian Gulf, all of that makes Balochistan a very, very inviting prospect for, say, a superpower like the Americans, because then they get access to Afghanistan, they are on the border of Iran, they can control Pakistan, they control the Persian Gulf, and they probably have an access right up to Central Asia as well as towards China through Afghanistan and other places. So the strategic importance of Balochistan is outside Pakistan. As long as people understand that, then I don't think this business of 5% of the population makes any difference. We have seen many places where there have even been lesser numbers of people, and yet they managed to break away and become independent. So if the Baloch are serious about their freedom struggle, then very good. But the problem is the social political structure in Balochistan militates against that. While the people want independence, the Sardars and the tribal chiefs are actually the biggest obstacle, because they are the quislings which the Pakistani state uses to keep its control on Balochistan.
Very good point, sir. In fact, there's a need to understand the Baloch issue a lot more. And while the Baloch saga quite clearly is a saga of Pakistan's treachery towards the people of Balochistan, Pakistan has been desperately looking for straws in the wind to pass on the blame to India. Unfortunately for the Balochis, the Indian government is still to make up its mind entirely to what extent it can take strategic benefits out of being involved in the Baloch liberation struggle, and those who argue that Balochistan could also hope to offer India economic benefits like the pipeline passing through that. A point very well brought out, that India should not mortgage its strategic security in a region as volatile as Balochistan. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us on this show. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.